When I was 15, I overheard my father laughing with my uncles in the next room. His voice was cold and sharp as he said, "She'll never own anything. She's too soft, too emotional, not built for success." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any insult ever could. I stood there, invisible, clutching my school books, pretending that their words didn't shatter me. But that night something inside me broke, and something else was born. Fire. Quiet, relentless fire. I promised myself that one day I would prove him wrong. Not with words, but with success so undeniable that he would have to choke on every doubt he ever spoke. For years I carried those words like scars, letting them drive me through long nights, endless failures, and every moment I wanted to give up. I didn't dream of revenge at first. I only dreamed of freedom, from his control, from his voice that echoed in my head, from the label of being not enough. But life has a strange way of circling back. The same man who once said I would never own anything now walks into my office every morning, wearing a badge with my company's name, and mine alone on it. He doesn't know I'm the one who signs his paycheck. Not yet. But he will. Because I've waited too long to stay silent. And this time when I speak, it won't be out of anger. It will be out of power. The sound of laughter drifted from the living room, thick and heavy with the kind of cruelty that didn't need to shout to hurt. I was 15, standing in the hallway of our small house, clutching my math book against my chest. My father's voice carried easily through the thin walls. "She'll never own anything," he said, his tone sharp with certainty. "Too soft, too emotional. She doesn't have what it takes." My uncles laughed, their voices blending into a chorus of agreement. I stood there frozen, my fingers digging into the edges of the book until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to disappear, to become invisible, to stop existing in a world where my worth was measured by how small I could stay. My father wasn't a cruel man in the way people think of cruelty. He didn't hit me. He didn't scream every day. But his words, those quiet, cutting words, were enough to bruise me from the inside out. He believed in strength, but not the kind that came from kindness or resilience. To him, strength was control, and control belonged to men. My mother had learned that long before I was born. She moved through life quietly, careful not to make waves. When he spoke, she listened. When he frowned, she smiled to calm him. When he called me useless or too sensitive, she would squeeze my hand under the table as if that could erase the sting. But it never did. I remember that night more clearly than anything. I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter fading. I felt something inside me tighten. Not anger, not exactly, but something close to determination. I whispered to myself, "I'll show you." I didn't know how, but I knew I would. Maybe not today, maybe not soon, but someday. My father worked at a steel factory, and he carried the smell of metal and sweat wherever he went. Every evening, he'd come home tired, drop his bag on the floor, and sit in his worn-out chair with the newspaper. He'd talk about real work, about how people who sat at desks or studied books didn't understand life. He used to say, "Dreams don't feed you. Hard hands do." I think that's why he resented me. I loved books more than anything. I loved learning, imagining, dreaming. To him, that made me weak. School was my escape. I was quiet but focused. My teachers noticed. Mrs. Langley, my English teacher, once told me, "You have a mind that sees beyond what's in front of you. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Carried those words like armor. Whenever my father told me I'd never be successful, I thought of her voice instead. But still it was hard. He had a way of making me question myself without even trying. Money was always tight at home. My father reminded us of it daily. "We don't have the luxury for your little dreams," he'd say whenever I mentioned going to college. He wanted me to finish high school and find a decent job, maybe as a cashier or secretary. I nodded every time, pretending to agree, but inside I was already planning my escape. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting on the porch steps with my notebook, scribbling ideas for a business project we had in school. My father came home early that day. He looked at the notebook, then at me. "What's this nonsense?" he asked. "Homework," I said softly. He flipped through the pages, his expression turning into that familiar mix of disappointment and irritation. "You think this will get you somewhere? Writing and drawing charts like some big boss. You don't even know what hard work means." He tossed the notebook onto the wet ground. "Go help your mother in the kitchen. That's where you belong." Something cracked inside me then, not like breaking glass but like a wall giving way. I picked up the soaked notebook, wiped the water off the pages and said quietly, "One day I'll own something." He didn't respond. He just laughed, a short, cruel sound that I'd remember for years. That night, I sat at my small wooden desk by the window, drying the pages with a hairdryer I'd borrowed from my mother. The ink had smudged, the paper wrinkled, but I didn't care. That ruined notebook became a symbol of everything I wanted to overcome. I started keeping a list on the last page. Every insult, every doubt, every time he told me I couldn't. I didn't write them to dwell on them. I wrote them to remember why I had to try. Sometimes I caught my mother watching me while I studied late at night. She'd stand in the doorway, her face tired but soft. "You'll make it," she whispered once. "Just don't become like him." I nodded, not really understanding what she meant at the time. But years later I would. By the time I turned 17, my world was small but my dreams were not. I applied for scholarships in secret, using the library's computers. When I got accepted to a business college 2 cities away, I didn't tell my father immediately. I waited until the acceptance letter arrived in the mail. I placed it on the kitchen table one morning before he left for work. He opened it, read it, and stared at me with disbelief. "Business school," he scoffed. "What are you going to do there? Learn how to waste money." I didn't answer. He tore the letter in half and threw it in the trash. That was the day I decided to leave. Not just the house, but the version of myself that believed I needed his approval. I taped the torn letter back together, packed a single suitcase, and took the bus out of town the next morning. As the city disappeared behind me, I felt scared, but free. I didn't know where that road would lead, only that it would be mine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from something, I was running toward it. The city felt enormous when I first arrived. Taller, louder, and faster than anything I'd ever known. The air smelled of exhaust and ambition, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere I didn't have to apologize for wanting more. I stepped off the bus with my patched-up suitcase and a heart full of fear and determination. I had only a few $100s in my pocket and a scholarship letter that I'd carefully taped together after my father tore it apart. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start over. My dorm room at the business college was small and shared with another girl named Priya. She was talkative, confident, and everything I wasn't at the time. While I unpacked my few clothes neatly, she threw hers onto the bed and said, "You look like you've never left home before." I smiled awkwardly and said, "I haven't." She laughed not unkindly and added, "Well, get ready. Out here, nobody's going to wait for you to catch up." She was right. The pace of life was relentless. The first few months were hard. My scholarship covered tuition but not food or books, so I took a job at a 24-hour diner near campus. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, go to classes all day, then spend nights refilling coffee cups and cleaning tables. By the time I got back to my dorm, my feet ached, and my eyes burned from exhaustion. But I didn't complain. Every hour I worked was a step away from the life I had left behind. Some nights, when the diner was empty, I would study between orders, using napkins to jot down business ideas. I loved the sound of the old register clicking open. It reminded me that money, even a few dollars at a time, could change a person's destiny. One of my regular customers, a quiet older man who came in every night at the same time, noticed me studying. One evening he said, "You study like someone running from something." I smiled faintly and replied, "Maybe I'm running toward something." He nodded slowly. "Either way, keep running. The world belongs to those who don't stop." Classes were tough, but I loved them. Marketing, management, finance. I absorbed it all like water after a long drought. I wasn't the smartest student, But I was the most determined. I sat in the front row, asked questions, and stayed behind to talk to professors. One of them, Mr. Daniels, noticed my dedication. He called me into his office one afternoon and said, "You remind me of myself when I started. Ambitious but with something to prove. Don't lose that edge. It's what separates the dreamers from the doers." Still, the loneliness hit hard sometimes. There were nights when the silence in my dorm felt heavy, when I missed my mother's quiet humming in the kitchen, or even the sound of my father's footsteps in the hallway. I wrote her letters every month, telling her about my classes, my job, and my small victories. She never wrote back, but I knew it wasn't because she didn't care. My father controlled everything, even the mail. I learned to live without replies. One cold winter night, the diner was nearly empty when two business students came in. They were talking about a startup idea, an app to help small shops track their sales. I listened while refilling their coffee, pretending not to care, but their conversation stuck in my mind. Later I went back to my dorm and began sketching out my own version of the idea. Simpler, more practical, focused on helping people like my father who struggled to keep track of finances. I didn't know it then, but that late-night doodle would change my life. During my second year, I joined a student entrepreneurship club. Most of the members were wealthy kids with big connections, but I didn't let that intimidate me. When it came time to pitch business ideas, my hands trembled as I stood in front of the group and presented my concept: affordable financial software for small businesses. To my surprise, a few people actually liked it. Two of them, Lucas and Emily, approached me afterward. "You've got something here," Lucas said. "It's rough, but it's real." Emily smiled. "Let's make it happen." We spent months working after classes, building prototypes on borrowed laptops and eating instant noodles for dinner. Every failure felt like a punch, but every tiny success kept us alive. We entered competitions, faced rejection after rejection, and kept improving. My grades dipped for a while, but I didn't care. I'd found my purpose. There were moments I thought of quitting, like the night our laptop crashed and we lost 3 months of work, or when our presentation was laughed at by a panel of investors who said, "You're too young and your market's too small." But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered my father's voice. "She'll never own anything." That single sentence pushed me harder than any encouragement ever could. By the time I graduated, our little startup wasn't making money yet, but it had potential. We had a working product, a few loyal users, and one investor who believed in us enough to fund a small office. I moved out of the dorm into a shared apartment with my co-founders, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was just surviving, I was building. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit by the window, looking at the city lights, thinking about how far I'd come from that small, suffocating house. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even secure, but I was free. And freedom, I realized, was worth more than anything money could buy. I still carried my old notebook, the one my father threw into the rain. The pages were wrinkled, the ink faded, but on the last page, I had written a new line beneath the list of every insult he'd ever said. "One day, I'll build something bigger than his words." I didn't know it yet, but that promise was already becoming real. And I was only just getting started. By the time I turned 25, the word failure had become more familiar to me than my own reflection. Our startup, once just an idea scribbled on a napkin, had gone through more breakdowns than I could count. There were months when we couldn't afford rent for our small office, when we shared one laptop between 3 people, and when instant noodles felt like a luxury. But every time we hit a wall, something inside me whispered, "You've been through worse." And I had. The memory of my father's voice, dismissing my dreams as foolish, became the push I needed every time I thought of giving up. The company, which we named Ledgerly, started with a simple mission: to help small businesses manage their finances easily. It was something close to my heart because I grew up watching my father struggle with bills, debts, and numbers he didn't understand. He used to say, "People like us aren't meant to deal with computers or big business stuff." But I wanted to prove that technology didn't have to belong only to the powerful, could belong to everyone. In the beginning, no one believed in us. We pitched our idea to over 30 investors, and every single one turned us down. Some said we were too young, some said our idea was too small, and others simply didn't see a future in a product built for people who didn't have much money to spend. Each rejection hurt, but it also fueled me. I would come home after every failed meeting, sit on the floor of our apartment with my laptop, and rewrite our pitch until my eyes burned. Lucas, ever the optimist, would say, "We just need one yes. That's all it takes." Emily would nod and add, "And when that yes comes, we'll be ready." That yes finally came one rainy afternoon when we were down to our last few $100s. A small angel investor named Mr. Reeves saw our presentation at a local startup event. He was an older man, soft-spoken but sharp, and he stayed behind after everyone else had left. "You're solving a real problem," he said, tapping the table thoughtfully. "You just need time and faith, and both are expensive." We laughed nervously, thinking he was teasing us. But then he smiled and added, "Lucky for you, I can afford a little of both." His modest investment didn't make us rich, but it gave us life. We rented a small office space, a single room with peeling paint and one old air conditioner that worked half the time, but to us it felt like a palace. We worked 14-hour days, building, testing, fixing bugs, and improving our design. The product slowly began to take shape. We created a mobile app, then a website, and within a year, Ledgerly was functional and ready to launch. Our first clients were tiny, local shops, street vendors, and small cafe owners. We visited them in person, helping them set up the app, sometimes for free. I remember one woman, Mrs. Khan, who owned a small bakery. She looked at me skeptically when I introduced our app, but agreed to try it. A month later, she called to say it had helped her track her expenses and save money for the first time. That call made all the sleepless nights worth it. But success didn't come easily. For every happy customer, there were 10 who deleted the app, saying it was too complicated or unnecessary. We faced technical failures, system crashes, and even a cyber attack that nearly destroyed our database. I broke down one night after spending 12 hours trying to recover our data, my head resting on the desk as tears fell onto the keyboard. Lucas found me there and said quietly, "You don't have to carry all of this alone." But I did, or at least I felt I had to. Because deep down, this wasn't just a business. It was the proof that I could be more than what my father said I'd be. 3 years passed in a blur of hard work and sacrifice. Then one morning everything changed. A financial magazine published a small article about us titled, "Young Entrepreneurs Revolutionize Small Business Finance." It was just a few paragraphs, but it caught the attention of a major investor who reached out the next week. Within months, we secured our first big funding round. We moved into a larger office, hired a team, and expanded across cities. For the first time, I had employees calling me "ma'am." Felt surreal. Despite the growth, I never let myself forget where it all began. Every time I saw the company name on our office door, I remembered the 15-year-old girl standing in a dark hallway, hearing her father say she would never own anything. That memory kept me grounded. Still, success brought new challenges. Investors wanted results faster, and competition started to grow. There were days I questioned if I was ready to lead something this big. I'd stand in front of the mirror some mornings, staring at my reflection and whispering, "You've earned this. Don't doubt it now." I learned that leadership wasn't about always knowing what to do. It was about being brave enough to decide anyway. The turning point came during an annual business conference. I was invited to speak on stage about our journey. Standing in front of hundreds of people, lights blinding my eyes, I felt my hands tremble. But then I remembered that scared teenager, the one who once thought she'd never be enough. I took a deep breath and began. When I started this company, I was told it wouldn't work, that I didn't belong in business, that people like me, young, inexperienced, and broke, had no right to dream this big. But here we are. The applause that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in my life. That night, as I returned to my apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the glittering skyline. The city no longer felt intimidating, it felt like mine. My phone buzzed with messages from investors and congratulations from friends, but I ignored them for a moment. I opened my old notebook instead, the one from years ago, On the last page, below all the old scars and scribbles, I wrote one new line. I own something now. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence would soon take on a meaning far deeper than I ever imagined. Because the man who once said I'd never own anything was about to walk right back into my life. Success had a strange stillness to it. After years of chaos, long nights, and barely surviving, the quiet hum of a steady business felt almost foreign. By the time I turned 30, Ledgerly had grown into a respected name. Our offices stretched across several cities, we had over 50 employees, and our user base was in the thousands. Investors who once ignored us now wanted meetings. I had everything I once dreamed of: freedom, financial security, and a company that bore my name. Yet sometimes in the middle of a busy day, a shadow from my past would cross my mind. My father's voice, sharp and certain. "She'll never own anything." Those words had built me, but they also haunted me. One Monday morning, my assistant came into my office holding a file. "We've received a new batch of applications for maintenance and security positions," she said. I nodded, half listening as I scrolled through my emails. "Anything urgent?" I asked. "Not really," she replied, then paused. "Although, there's one name I think you'll want to see." She slid the folder onto my desk and tapped the top page. I looked down, and the world stopped for a second. The name printed neatly in black ink was Rashid Khan. My father's name. I stared at it for so long that my assistant asked if everything was all right. I nodded quickly, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Yes," I said. "Leave it with me." She smiled and left the room, the door clicking softly behind her. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. It was him. His handwriting was unmistakable, strong, deliberate strokes, the same ones that once signed my school report cards with red ink comments like, "Needs to focus more." His resume was short. He had been working at a manufacturing company for over 20 years, but it had shut down recently. The note at the end said, "Looking for stable work to support family." I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. I hadn't seen or spoken to him in almost a decade. After I left home, he never tried to contact me. My mother and I exchanged occasional letters in secret, but she never mentioned him much. Now, here he was, unknowingly applying for a job at the company his daughter owned. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or tear up the paper. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. Every time I looked at my office, the polished floors, the glass walls, the quiet hum of success, it all felt surreal. He had told me I'd never own anything, and now he was asking for work under my roof. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was something deeper, something that twisted my chest in a way I couldn't name. That evening I stayed late at the office. The city lights flickered outside the windows as I stared at his application. My mind filled with memories. His laughter when he told relatives I'd never succeed. His voice echoing through the small house. His stern face when he tore up my acceptance letter. And yet, I also remembered the tired slump of his shoulders when he came home from work, the quiet sighs he thought no one heard, the way he'd fall asleep in his chair after dinner. He had been hard, yes, but he had also been broken in ways I only now began to understand. I could have easily rejected his application. It would have been simple, even satisfying. But something inside me resisted. Instead, I wrote a note to the HR manager. "Hire him. Standard contract. No special treatment. And please don't disclose ownership details to any new hires." I signed it and placed it in the outbox. My hand was steady this time. A week later, I received confirmation that he had accepted the job. He was to start as a maintenance worker at one of our city branches. When I read those words, a wave of emotion I couldn't explain washed over me. Pride, pity, closure. I wasn't sure. But I did know one thing. I needed to see him, even if he didn't know who I was. A few days later, I visited that branch unannounced. It was a smaller office. Busy, efficient, filled with the quiet buzz of people working. I stood near the glass entrance, my heart pounding as I scanned the floor. Then I saw him. He was older now, his hair fully gray, his once straight posture bent with time. His hands, rough and scarred, still moved with precision as he fixed a light fixture in the hallway. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered, but somehow gentler. I stayed out of sight watching him work. No one there knew who he really was to me. He greeted people politely, kept to himself, and worked quietly. At one point, a young employee dropped a stack of papers, and my father bent down to help him pick them up. "Careful, son," he said, a faint smile crossing his face. The tone of his voice, soft, almost kind, caught me off guard. I left without speaking to him that day. I told myself I wasn't ready. Maybe I was afraid he'd look at me and still see the same useless girl who would never own anything. Or maybe I was afraid he wouldn't recognize me at all. Days turned into weeks. Every now and then I'd check in on his performance reports. He was punctual, hard-working, respected by his colleagues. He had no idea his daughter signed his paycheck. Sometimes I wondered if I should tell him. Maybe he'd be proud. Maybe he'd be angry. Or maybe it wouldn't matter to him at all. One evening, as I closed my laptop, my assistant asked, "Should I schedule a meeting with the new maintenance staff for the quarterly feedback?" I hesitated, then said, "No, I'll handle it personally." I knew what I was going to do. It was time, not for revenge, not for triumph, but for peace. I didn't want him to see my success as punishment. I wanted him to see that despite everything I had made it. Not because of him, not against him, but beyond him. That night, as I stood by my window, looking out at the city I now owned a part of, I whispered the words I'd waited my whole life to say. "I own something, Dad. And I earned it." Tomorrow, I would walk into that branch and look him in the eyes. But not as the scared daughter he once belittled. As the woman who built her own world, and quietly, unknowingly, became his boss. The morning I decided to finally face my father, the sky was soft gray, the kind that carried both calm and tension in the air. I sat in my car outside the branch office, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart beating so loudly I could hear it over the hum of traffic. For years I had imagined this moment in different ways, sometimes filled with anger, sometimes with pride, but now that it was here, all I felt was a deep, trembling uncertainty. What could I possibly say to the man who had spent my entire childhood convincing me I'd never be enough? Would he even care? Would he remember the words that had shaped me? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing. I couldn't move forward until I closed this chapter for good. When I finally stepped into the building, the employees greeted me warmly. To them, I was just the founder paying an unannounced visit, something I did from time to time. No one knew the truth of what I was there for. I walked through the corridors slowly, glancing at the familiar desks, the hum of computers, the small signs of a company that had grown from a dream into something real. Every wall here was a reminder of the nights I spent crying, the sacrifices, the doubt, and the quiet, stubborn hope that one day I'd prove him wrong. Then I saw him, my father. He was fixing a flickering ceiling light, standing on a small ladder in the hallway. His shoulders looked narrower now, his hair completely white. His uniform hung loose on him, and his hands, those rough, powerful hands that once built and broke everything in our home, shook slightly as he worked. For a long moment I simply watched him. It was like looking at a ghost from a life I'd buried long ago. "Excuse me," I said softly. My voice trembled. He turned around slowly, squinting as if trying to place me. "Yes, ma'am," he said politely. The word hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "I just wanted to thank you for the work you've been doing here. The staff says you've been keeping things running smoothly." He wiped his hands on a cloth and gave a faint smile. "Just doing my job. It's good to stay busy at my age." His voice was gentler than I remembered. Not the harsh bark of authority that once ruled our home, just a tired older man's voice worn down by life. I wanted to tell him everything right there. To say, "I'm your daughter. This company, this building, all of it belongs to the girl you said would never own anything." But the words stuck in my throat. Instead I asked, "Do you like working here?" He nodded slowly. "It's good work. People are kind. The owner must be a good person to run a place like this." I almost laughed at that, a quiet, choked sound that wasn't quite amusement. She tries, I replied softly. He looked at me for a moment, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, something distant, uncertain. You remind me of someone, he said finally. My daughter. Haven't seen her in years. My heart clenched. I asked carefully, what happened? He sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. She left. Said she wanted more from life. I told her she was wasting her time. It was harsh. I thought I was protecting her from disappointment. But I guess I was just afraid. He paused, shaking his head. If she's out there, I hope she's doing better than I ever did. I felt tears sting my eyes. That one sentence, the quiet, remorseful tone, did something years of distance never could. It softened the anger I had held onto for so long. He wasn't the unbreakable man I'd built in my memories. He was human, flawed, scared, and maybe in his own broken way sorry. I took a deep breath. She is, I said quietly. Your daughter's doing very well. He smiled faintly, not realizing what I meant. Good, he murmured. That makes me happy. Then he turned back to his work, climbing the ladder again, and in that moment I knew. He didn't need to know the truth. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I had nothing left to prove. His ignorance didn't belittle my success. It highlighted it. I didn't need him to see my name on a sign or a paycheck to know I'd won. The real victory was standing there, calm and proud, without the need for revenge or recognition. Before leaving I said softly, You raised a strong daughter, Mr. Khan. She turned out just fine. He looked down at me, his eyes soft and tired. Thank you, ma'am, he said, smiling. That means more than you know. As I walked out of the building, I felt something release inside me, a weight I'd carried since I was 15. The resentment, the pain, the desperate need to prove him wrong, all of it drifted away like dust in the wind. Outside, the sky had brightened, and the sun was breaking through the gray clouds. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply and freely. That evening I went back to my office. The city lights shimmered through the windows, painting the room in gold and silver. On my desk sat my old notebook, the one I'd carried since the beginning. I opened it, running my fingers over the faded ink and water-stained pages. Every word, every scar, every line was a reminder of how far I'd come. On the last page, beneath the sentence I own something now, I picked up my pen and wrote a final line, and I've finally let go. I leaned back in my chair, smiling through tears. My story had started with his doubt, but it ended with my peace. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need him to say he was proud. The truth was simple and quiet. I had built something beautiful out of the ruins he left behind. Outside, the city buzzed with life. My city, my company, my world. And somewhere, just a few miles away, my father finished his day's work and went home, unaware that the empire he once said I'd never build now carried his daughter's name. That was enough. It was more than enough. And as the night settled over the skyline, I closed my notebook, turned off the lights, and smiled, because I had finally won, not through revenge or pride, but through forgiveness. The girl who would never own anything now owned peace. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more powerful and emotional story journeys.